Your doctor told you your blood sugar is high, so they prescribed you insulin. But what if high blood sugar is just a symptom and the real disease is that you already have too much insulin? Today, we're exposing the treatment trap. The reason this message hits so hard is because millions of people with type 2 diabetes feel trapped inside a system that keeps adding more medication while the scale climbs. The numbers still bounce around, and nobody explains the biology in plain English. This video is for educational purposes only. Never adjust or stop your insulin or diabetes medication without direct supervision from your prescribing physician. Doing so can be life-threatening. That warning is not a formality. It is essential. Diabetes medications, especially insulin, can affect blood glucose quickly, and abrupt changes can be dangerous. Before we begin, we must make a life or death distinction. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease where the pancreas produces zero insulin. Type 1 diabetics absolutely must inject insulin to survive. This video is strictly about type 2 diabetes, a completely different metabolic condition where the body produces insulin, but the cells have become resistant to it. In type 1 diabetes, the body does not make insulin or makes very little, so insulin replacement is essential. In type 2 diabetes, the core problem is usually insulin resistance. The body does not respond to insulin the way it should, and over time, many people also develop impaired insulin production. And that difference matters because I need to say something many patients silently feel but rarely hear out loud. If you gained weight after starting insulin, that is not a moral failure. It is biology. Insulin is not just a blood sugar lowering hormone. It is also a storage hormone. And when the body is resistant to insulin, the pancreas often has to make more of it just to keep glucose under control. That is one reason type 2 diabetes becomes harder to manage over time, and why weight gain can show up in the story. So if you're exhausted, frustrated, and confused because you were told, just take more insulin while your body feels like it is pushing back, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken, and you are not lazy. Your system is signaling overload. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you the biology of the overstuffed suitcase, why insulin resistance behaves like a traffic jam at the cellular level, and why simply forcing more glucose into a resistant system can feel like treating the symptom while ignoring the engine underneath it. Now let's slow the tape down and look at what insulin is actually doing inside the body. Insulin is not just a number-lowering drug in a vacuum. It is a key hormone that helps blood sugar leave the bloodstream, enter your cells, and get used for energy. When that system is working properly, glucose goes in, blood sugar comes down, and the body stays in balance. But in type 2 diabetes, that balance has been disrupted. Here is the part most people never get explained clearly. In insulin resistance, the cells in your muscles, fat, and liver stop responding to insulin the way they should. So the pancreas pushes harder and releases higher levels of insulin just to get the same result. At first, that can keep blood sugar from rising too fast. But over time, the system gets louder, less efficient, and more chaotic. And this is where the overstuffed suitcase comes in. Imagine each cell as a suitcase. For years, the suitcase has been packed with too much incoming fuel. The body keeps trying to add more. Insulin keeps knocking on the zipper, trying to force more glucose inside. But the suitcase is already full. The problem is not that the zipper is weak. The problem is that the bag is overloaded. This is not laziness. It is not a personal failure. It is a saturated system. Insulin resistance is a condition where the body does not respond to insulin the way it should, and that can lead to higher blood glucose and weight gain. So what happens to all that glucose when it cannot get where it is supposed to go? It backs up in the bloodstream. That is why high blood sugar and cellular starvation can exist at the same time. Too much sugar in the blood, not enough efficient access in the cells. The body then tries to store the overflow in the liver and muscles, and when those storage sites are full, The remaining energy gets diverted into body fat. That is one reason insulin resistance can travel with weight gain and a bigger waistline. That is the biology in one sentence. The body is trying to protect itself from overload, but the compensation makes the loop worse. More insulin, more storage pressure, more resistance, more fluctuation, more frustration. And that is why many people feel like they are doing everything right and still getting punished by the scale and by the meter. You are not failing at diabetes. Your metabolism is stuck in a feedback loop. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you why the treatment can become the trap, how more insulin can temporarily lower blood sugar while leaving the real problem untouched. Because once you understand the suitcase, you stop blaming the person carrying it. Now we arrive at the trap. Your blood sugar is high, and the instinct is understandable. Bring it down fast. That is exactly what insulin can do. But in type 2 diabetes, the deeper reality is that the body is already living in a state of insulin resistance, meaning the cells are not responding normally to insulin, and the pancreas has often been pushing out more and more insulin to compensate. In that setting, adding more insulin may improve the glucose number in the short term, but it does not automatically repair the underlying resistance. This is the insulin paradox. The medicine lowers the symptom, but the biology underneath can keep marching on. Insulin helps move glucose out of the bloodstream and into cells. It also promotes storage, and NIDK notes that some diabetes medicines, including insulin, may promote weight gain. CDC likewise explains that when the liver and muscles are full, extra sugar can be stored as body fat, which helps explain why weight can rise even as glucose is being forced down. Picture the overstuffed suitcase one more time. You keep packing it. More glucose comes in. More insulin arrives to force the zipper shut. But a full suitcase does not become magically larger just because you press harder on it. In insulin resistance, the cells have become less responsive, so the body often compensates by making more insulin. That compensation can keep blood sugar from rising even higher for a while, but it also adds more storage pressure to a system that is already overloaded. And when glucose cannot be used efficiently, the body does what survival biology has always done. It stores the overflow. CDC describes how excess sugar is stored in the liver and muscles, and when those places are full, the remaining sugar is stored as body fat. That is why so many people with type 2 diabetes feel like they are watching the meter improve while the waistline gets worse. The short-term number may fall, but the long-term storage logic has not been reversed. That is why some patients feel the cruelest version of the disease: lower sugar on paper, higher burden in the body. More insulin can sometimes be necessary, and no one should ever stop it without medical supervision. But in a resistant system, escalating insulin without changing the upstream terrain can mean more weight gain, more storage, and more dependency on the same rescue mechanism. NIDDK specifically notes that insulin may promote weight gain, and ADA guidance emphasizes considering weight effects when choosing glucose-lowering therapy. That is the tragedy of the trap. The number improves, but the engine stays damaged. The patient is told they are being managed, yet what they really need is a strategy that reduces the pressure on the system itself. In the next chapter, we move to the escape route, how lowering insulin demand allows the cells to breathe again, and why that changes the entire story. And to be absolutely clear, any insulin change has to be supervised by the prescribing clinician. The solution is not to keep shoving more fuel into an already overloaded system. The solution is to empty the suitcase. In type 2 diabetes, the goal is to lower the demand for insulin enough that cells can respond more normally again. That is why lower carbohydrate eating patterns can be useful for many people. The ADA notes that low-carb meal patterns can help reduce A1C, support weight loss, and improve triglycerides and HDL in some patients. Think of refined carbohydrates like the fast inflow that keeps the suitcase jammed shut. When you cut down the foods that spike glucose fastest, you reduce the amount of insulin the body has to release to manage the load. CDC explains that carbs can still be part of a healthy diabetes plan, but the key is portion and quality, choosing carbs that have less impact on blood sugar and more nutritional value, especially fiber-rich options. This is why many people feel dramatically better when they stop snacking all day and give the body a real window to come back down. NIDDK says intermittent fasting, especially time-restricted eating, is being studied in type 2 diabetes and may help some people lose weight, lower A1C, and improve time in range. But the research is still evolving. The key phrase is not fast harder. It is safely reduce the insulin burden. And this part matters. Fasting or cutting carbs is not something to improvise when you are on insulin. Low blood glucose is common among people with type 2 diabetes who take insulin or certain other medicines, and NIDDK specifically warns that fasting while continuing glucose-lowering medicines can increase the risk of hypoglycemia. That is why any change in meal timing or carbohydrate intake has to be coordinated with the prescribing clinician. So the strategy is simple, but not easy. Lower the input, lower the pressure, lower the insulin demand, and let the cells breathe again. When the body is not constantly flooded with incoming glucose, the liver and muscle storage pools can start to empty, and the system becomes less chaotic. That is the biological logic behind lowering refined carbs, using a sustainable lower carbohydrate pattern, and considering time-restricted eating with medical supervision. It is not punishment, it is metabolic relief. That is the turn in the story. Not more force, less congestion, not a bigger push against resistance. A quieter system that can finally respond. And in the next chapter, we go one step deeper, how people can support insulin sensitivity over time while remembering that any medication changes must be directed by their endocrinologist or prescribing physician. Now we come to the deeper question. Once the suitcase starts emptying, how do you help the cell become responsive again? The foundation is always the same. Reduce the insulin burden through food quality, portion control, and when appropriate and medically supervised, time-restricted eating or lower carbohydrate patterns. But the real world is rarely simple because insulin resistance does not appear overnight. It develops over years, and the metabolic terrain often needs sustained support, not just one heroic intervention. That is why some people add a botanical support protocol as an adjunct, not a replacement, while they work with their clinician on the bigger metabolic picture. I need to be precise here. The National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health says there is not enough scientific evidence to show that any dietary supplement can manage or prevent type 2 diabetes. And the FDA makes clear that supplements are not approved to treat disease. So no supplement should be sold to you as a magic reversal. But as part of a broader plan, some people use targeted nutritional support while they tighten the fundamentals. If you are considering a premium metabolic support protocol like Sugar Defender, the correct expectation is not this will cure diabetes. The correct expectation is this may be a supportive tool inside a supervised plan focused on glucose control, weight reduction, and insulin sensitivity. That framing matters, because the most reliable ways to improve insulin sensitivity are still the basics that move the biology: reducing excess weight when present, improving diet quality, and increasing physical activity. NIDDK and CDC both emphasize lifestyle as a central part of diabetes management. That is what our sensitization really means in plain English. Less traffic, less overload, less panic in the system, and more normal communication between insulin and the cell. as glucose exposure falls and the body is no longer constantly forced to compensate. The storage pools in the liver and muscles can begin to ease. Clinically, that is why people often see better glucose trends when they lose weight, move more, and reduce the need for repeated insulin spikes. Some prescription medications, such as metformin, are also used because they help the body use insulin better. And this is where I have to slow down and be crystal clear. If you are on insulin or another glucose-lowering medicine, you cannot treat this like a self-experiment. Lower blood glucose is common in people with type 2 diabetes who use insulin, and changes in eating pattern or supplements can affect glucose levels. Any medication adjustment has to be made with the prescribing clinician because the goal is better control without dangerous hypoglycemia. So if you want the short version of the strategy, it is this: lower the insulin demand, empty the suitcase, restore the cell's sensitivity, and use every tool, food, movement, medicine, and carefully chosen support in a coordinated way. That is the true opposite of the treatment trap. And that is why the most responsible premium protocol is never the loudest one. It is the one that respects biology, respects medication safety, and respects the fact that your body is trying to heal, not betray you. Always consult your endocrinologist before changing any regimen, adding any supplement, or adjusting any insulin dose. Never start, stop, or change insulin, diabetes medication, or supplement use without direct guidance from your prescribing physician or endocrinologist, because doing so can be dangerous.